Welcome to today's episode. I'm truly honored to be joined by Dee Edgeworth, author of the compelling book, The High Ground. When I first encountered this book, I was immediately drawn to its powerful exploration of American virtue, a theme that resonates deeply with our nation's founding principles and the ongoing conversation about character in our society. I believe The High Ground is a work that deserves a place in every school across America, as it offers valuable insights into the values that have shaped our country. Today we're discussing the inspiration behind the book, the lessons it offers, and why its message is more relevant than ever. Dee, welcome to Cedar Fort. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Happy Memorial Day.
Yes, it's Memorial Day, and it's a day to honor those who've given so much, and I think today ties in with your book, myself.
It does, yeah. Perfect tie-in, perfect topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Your book is The High Ground, Why Civic Virtue Matters to America. This is something I have been thinking about for a long time. I just feel that we're declining in America as far as virtue. I pointed out to my wife a few days ago, there's billboards, even here in Utah, talking about things that I don't think should be talked about. And, they're offering various medical services and things. And I just thought, there was a day that would never be up there on a billboard.
Right.
And it's really, it's just not good. And I'm just concerned. I'm concerned with our government. I'm concerned with this. I don't care who the president is. I'm concerned with overdoing executive orders.
Yeah.
I don't care I don't care what the name of the president is. I don't think executive orders were meant to be used the way they're being used, and it just disturbs me.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
It's a very controversial point right now.
Yes. Now, I read your bio, and this is the first time I've actually met you, but just tell me a little bit about yourself. I know you're a retired attorney.
Yes.
And you're in California?
Yeah, well, I live in California now. I've been a prosecutor for 35 years. I actually worked for the county of San Bernardino as the district attorney, deputy district attorney for 26 years. I retired from that job, and then I was hired by the U.S. Department of Justice and moved to Washington, D.C., and I worked another 8 years there. So I have a total of 35 years in as a prosecutor, even for federal government and in the state government.
Wow, as a prosecutor, you met a lot of interesting people.
I did. I did.
People who said they were totally innocent of the crime.
Right. That may well be. Most of my work was in narcotics enforcement. So I did a lot of work, especially with the federal government, with the large-scale drug cartels. That was my job in Washington, D.C. I worked for the OCDEF, the Office of Criminal I can't remember what it stands for. Anyway, we prosecuted large-scale drug cases. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you fine.
I'm getting feedback from your side here. All right. We prosecuted the big scale, like Mexican drug cartels. That was a very interesting job. I did that for several years in Washington, D.C. And then my last 3 years, I was transferred to Morocco, and I worked at the U.S. Embassy doing terrorism cases.
Wow. Weren't you concerned about your life when you're prosecuting cartels?
Not really. I felt pretty secure in doing that job, so I didn't worry about it. It was good. In court, of course, you have bailiffs and you have policemen there, so you feel pretty safe when you're in court. And I never really felt that threatened in my job. And I was the state for 26 years as a local prosecutor, and I only had one occasion where I was a little concerned for my safety of my family. But outside of that, it was fine.
All right. Well, let's get to your book, Why Civic Virtue Matters to America. Now, this is not a long book.
No.
And in fact, the last 30 pages, I love this. It's endnotes and bibliographies. And so I love that. Sometimes I find the endnotes and bibliographies more interesting than the actual text of the book.
Very true. Yeah. Yeah, very true.
Yeah, I love that. And And it's interesting how you start off. If I was editing this book, I would have had you start off, and I got to look at these chapters here. Hang on, I got to get to the index. I would have started off with why civic virtue matters to America.
Oh,
but you started, and I love the way. I'm glad I'm not the editor, because you start off with talking about George Washington at Dorchester Heights and the Temple of Virtue, Abigail Adams, John and Abigail Adams, Ben Franklin, Benjamin Rush, John Quincy, and so forth. And these are tales, stories that really highlight various virtues. And then at the end of each chapter, and I looked, each of these chapters are only about 4 pages long. To me, it's a kind of a book I could open up almost anywhere and start reading.
It is true. Yeah, the idea was that these are all short stories. So the reason I wrote the book is because these are stories that I learned when I was in school, and they aren't talked about much anymore. These are stories about our American founders that unfortunately are not taught in schools anymore. And so I wanted to save them for my children and grandchildren, so they would know, the basic virtues that our founders had. And so I started. I actually was a writer of legal treatises for the Department of Justice and for the American Bar Association, and wrote several books for them. And as I was coming to the end of my career, I could tell I was going to be retiring, and I still wanted to write. I do enjoy writing, and so I decided I wanted to write something more for the general audience. And that's why the impression came to me to focus on the founding fathers and the virtues that they had. And so I started doing research. I was living in Maryland, but I worked in Washington, D.C. And so I would travel into the Library of Congress, and I got a library card, and I began doing research at the Library of Congress about our founding fathers. And it was just fascinating. That's why the book is well documented, you can see, because I read a lot of different books in the Library of Congress about our founding fathers. And the impression came to me to put it together and to focus on their virtues. I mean, you know a lot about the founding fathers, but very little is written about their virtues. And so that's why I felt that this would be a good book to write, to focus on the virtues. And then, do we still have those virtues today? That's the question is, do we still live those virtues, and why are they important today? Which I believe they are. I mean, that's why I wrote the book. And so it was a labor of love. I mean, I worked on it for about 3 or 4 years in Washington, D.C. And then I had to set it aside because I was assigned to go overseas to work at the U.S. Embassy in Rabat, Morocco. So while I was there, obviously, I had to set aside the book. I didn't have time. And I was there for 3 years. So I didn't get a chance to work on it while I was over in Morocco. And then when I retired. So when I finished that job in Morocco, I retired from the federal government, and then my wife and I put in papers to serve a mission, and we were missionaries for the church in the France Lyon mission. We served in Geneva, Switzerland. We worked with the young single adults, so we were there for 18 months. We stayed there until COVID started, so they brought all the senior couples home, but we were finishing anyway. Then when I came home, I finally had the time to finish the book. So I worked on it when I came home, and I was retired. Then I was able to devote some time to work on putting the book together. And so that's when I actually wrote the book.
Very interesting. Wow. So it was several years in making. Yeah, the virtues of our founding fathers, I've often wondered. I assume that they know what's going on here, and if they're going, what happened to the country we founded? Because virtue is definitely not strong anymore.
And, unfortunately not. Unfortunately not.
Yeah, and it seems to me like it's more of and I think if I'm correct, you mentioned it in your book, that this generation is more of or some of these generations have been more what's in it for me type thing. It's about me. Right. And that's what determines what they're going to do, if it's right or wrong.
Right.
And okay, let's get to a brighter side here.
Let me tell you
chapter.
One thing about the book, before you get into the founding fathers, the introduction to the book is I talk about my parents. My parents were during World War II. and my parents were there were a lot of virtues that were displayed by the greatest generation, the World War II generation. And
Yeah.
so the first chapter I talk about is they have virtues. That group did, and they were the virtues were very important to my parents and to the World War II generation, to the greatest generation. But we seem to have lost that. They kind of went away from about the 1960s. We started to losing the virtues that were so important to our country began to wane, and then of course we're where we are today. Where people even question the value of the virtues today.
Yes, and that was the next generation. And the
Mm-hmm.
Book of Mormon talks quite often about the next generation just doesn't believe the prior generation of what they believed or what they saw.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
yeah, it's really something. I I want to save these chapters of the various characters for people to read because they are
Mm-hmm.
short. And so I'd like to jump to the chapters is why civic virtue matters in America.
Mm-hmm.
And if you gave a summation of that, why is it so important for us to have these virtues?
Well, I talk about that, it's important because the quality of life here in America, it depends upon the virtues of the people who live in the country. And that's what the founding fathers believe. They believe that we can only maintain our constitutional republic with a people who were virtuous, who lived these virtues. And if we don't live those virtues, then we're not going to be able to retain the Republican form of government that we have. And so that's why I felt it was so important. And then the last chapters of the book, I focus on today, the 21st century, and the virtues. And I give examples of those virtues and how we still have those virtues today? I believe we do. I believe there are. We aren't. They don't talk about them much anymore, but we have some examples of people who actually have demonstrated the virtues. Like one of the virtues when I talk about Washington, that was the example I used on Dorchester Heights. That was an example of courage. Well, in the 21st century, what do we have? You have 9/11. You have the public service. You have the law enforcement, not law enforcement, but public safety workers who ran into the building there as the towers were coming down to save people. These are examples of courage. So I get that as an example that we have courage today. That we need to honor those who demonstrate courage. So that
Yes.
was basically so the stories basically are focusing on today examples that we have these virtues today and why are they important.
Yeah, it's you also tell the story of I can't remember which flight it was, but it was the one that went into the river there at New York,
Yeah,
and since someone jumped in to save somebody that couldn't
exactly.
get a hold of the line, and of course that water gets pretty cold, and it's hypoglycemia can really
Oh,
start
sure.
kicking in, and even though you want to save somebody, you're finding you're risking your own life.
Yeah,
Um,
It was January when that happened, so in the middle of winter is when that
yeah,
happened. So
yeah,
so
there was
yeah,
ice. Yeah,
and
it
so
was cold.
in fact it was before the State of the Union. So President Reagan was the president, and he cited
Yes.
them. He had that man there and honored him for the courage that he
Yeah.
displayed in saving the life of this person who couldn't needed help.
Yeah. I wish we had him back.
Well,
Or I wish we had Abraham Lincoln back or
yeah,
George
a lot of people.
Washington.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
But that's not the way things work.
No, that's not
Yeah.
the way.
In your chapter, Why They Matter in the 21st Century, you quote quite a bit some research that was done, I think, can't remember can't remember the first institute that's on there.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, anyway, it was one of the institutes, well-known institutes, that did polls and found that they listed virtues that they found
Mm-hmm.
within polling people. And then, but that wasn't the only one. You went to several other sources to see what they said. And as I looked at that list of each of those, and you pointed out in the book, there's several that really cross over.
Mm-hmm.
There are
Oh,
certain
definitely so.
ones that, and if memory serves me right, I think one was integrity, wasn't it? That
I'm
crossed
sorry.
over
Oh, yeah.
in,
Uh-huh.
yeah, integrity, and Boy, we just lack that today.
Hmm. Well, yeah, and that's one thing today. People, we promote those who get around those kind of rules, who do the shortcuts. But those who really have integrity are not on it. And I give examples in the book of people today who demonstrated integrity. There's an article there, a story by Tad Callister, when he was an attorney, how he served with one of his clients who demonstrated integrity and honesty in a business and a legal transaction where he didn't need to, but he felt he had to because
Yeah.
he had integrity. I quote from Huntsman when he was selling his business, and they negotiated a price for the business, and they shook their hands on it. 6 months went by, and all of a sudden they still didn't have the paperwork for it, and so the value of Huntsman container had gone up substantially. So people were always expecting Huntsman to ask for a lot more money, but he did not. He said, "A deal is a deal. We shook our hands on it. I'm going to stay with what we agreed to." And so the world was amazed, that he had that kind of integrity. And so those are examples that I cite in the book of people who demonstrated integrity today. So these weren't just values that were important to our founders; they are important today, in our country.
Well, I think you also talk about Romney, if memory serves
I
me
do,
correct. Yes,
right?
and so yeah,
It's important with that one there. I want to point out there is that obviously I talk about his vote, to impeach President Trump during the first presidency. A lot of people disagree with his vote, but I cite that as an example. You may disagree with his vote, but you have to respect his integrity that he voted his conscience. If he felt he had to
yeah,
do that because he wanted to make a point that this was his integrity. And so people were amazed. I mean, that's a great example of a politician who took a big political risk. I mean, to vote against the president of his party, the head of his party, and the president, but yet he felt he needed to do that because he could not um, get away from the fact that he felt that this was illegal, and he voted his conscience.
yes. I was sitting here thinking as you were talking, crossed my mind. I wish this book was offered in elementary school
Uh huh.
because you're not using real big words,
Right.
and so I think an elementary level it would be appropriate because this
Yeah,
is
a
what
lot of
our
people
children.
have made that comment that
Yeah,
that's why I wrote the book. I would like to see the book used more in school because there are some examples of integrity and by our founding fathers and even today. I think it's important.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I really, my opinion, if I was the head of the school system here in Utah, I would make this a mandatory reading for elementary because it's just these things are so important and so much of our youth get their ideas from TikTok and social
Yeah.
media and that's not always the best scene and it's just
Let me share an example of why I can show you why it's so important. I was doing a book signing at the Barnes and Noble store in Montclair, California, and we had a desk set up, and and I was talking about the book there. We had like 4 or 5 young men of high school age who were wearing suits. They came walking by the desk, the table. They kind of looked at the table and walked away, and they came back and wanted to know a little bit more about the book. And so I told them about the book, and I told the story of Washington at Dorchester Heights, which they did not know. They had never heard that story before. And so one of the young men, he took the book and he went and he bought one. And then he came back, he said he wanted another one. He said, "I want to buy one for my teacher." And in fact, he was in the honors American history class at his high school. But he thought the book was so important that he wanted his teacher to be able to have the book and to use the stories in there and teaching his class.
and that's assuming the teacher agrees with
Oh, I agree. Well,
that.
but what I like about that story is that it's youth. This came from
Yes,
high school students
yes,
themselves who are interested in the topic and would like to hear more about it in their school.
yeah, yeah. No, I think it's a wonderful story. Again, I'm just thinking A lot of our teachers are swinging way over to the left side, and this is not
Hmm.
something that they would want to even talk about. But hopefully, that teacher is not that case, and yeah, it needs to be in the schools. Well, to kind of
You
sum
notice that
up,
I
yeah,
stay away from politics. I mean, I don't. It's not a red book. It's not a blue book. This is a book about
yeah,
virtues. All right. No
yeah,
matter where you are on the political spectrum, this book will be is good because it ties into the values of our country, which are no matter what party you belong to or your political beliefs. There, those values are important to everybody.
yes, yeah, I agree, and I'm glad you made that point. And yes, I didn't see anything here where it was blue or green or red or whatever.
Hmm.
So, very good. Well, to sum up, how would you best okay, let's just assume I haven't read your book at all, like at the bookstore.
Hmm.
And what would be the main message you'd give me if I walked up to you and said, really, what's this book about?
Okay, this book is about our founding fathers and the values that they felt were important to the country when they founded the country, and why those values are still important today. That's really the theme of the book: is that these values or virtues were the foundation of our country, and they still are important today. We need to understand to go back to those virtues and live those virtues. Because if we don't, our country we have a perilous path ahead of us if we deviate or forget the virtues that founded the country.
And how would that help me if I read your book?
How would it help? Well, I talk about I specify what the virtues are. So in the first part of the book, I go through and I sum up what those virtues are, and then I give examples of what. So I give examples from our founding fathers, and then I give examples today of people who have demonstrated those virtues. So it's an uplifting. It's not a depressing book. It's not a book that's depressing. It's a book that's uplifting and telling people that we have these virtues. They formed our country. They were important recently, and they're still important even today. And we need to follow and live those virtues today.
Well, Dee, thank you very much for joining me. It's been delightful speaking to you, and I really like this book. It, I, it really carries a strong message that I feel needs to be taught and needs to be emphasized, and especially since today is Memorial Day.
That's right.
I think it's extremely benefiting because you talk about the greatest generation, and a lot of our youth today wouldn't know any idea what we're talking about,
Right. That's
because
very
they're
true.
not familiar with that book that was written. I
Mm-hmm.
can't remember who the author was, but anyway, um, with that book and talking about those who, because of World War II, that generation grew up not only with World War II, but they grew up with the Depression.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
some say that the war ended the Depression. Some say it was about on its last legs anyway. And that's a whole different discussion for historians to argue about. But the
Mm-hmm.
fact is, these are people who went through a depression. Some even, often when I'm at the temple, I'm doing names for people. I see dates like 1890, and I'm thinking, 1890, okay. Let's see, he'd have been 20 in his 20s for World War One, in his
Mm-hmm.
40s for World War Two.
All right.
Is it possible that he served in both wars? I don't know. And then to go through then you had what was called 10 good years, what they referred to as the Roaring Twenties. Really weren't that good. They just appeared to be that good. And
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, the Depression hit. So these were people who went through a hard time,
Mm-hmm.
and yet were able to hang on to those virtues that I think in all helped to win the war.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, this is why my first story is I talked this about my parents. I was home. I was in high school. I was in my high school years, and I was watching. This is the 1960s, right? So you have Vietnam War is on. You have burning of the draft cards. A lot of civil unrest during that. I remember I'm watching the news with my parents on TV, and my father watched all the protests and the war, etc. And my father turned to me and he says, this will never work. Talked about the war, this will never work. He says, we were so divided that we're not going to win that war. He said, it's so different than it was in World War II. In World War II, we were so unified, there isn't any sacrifice we would not have made to win that war. And that's the difference. He pointed that out. And that impressed upon my mind that, my generation, we're not measuring up. We're not willing to sacrifice on behalf of our country. And so that's kind of why I wrote the book.
Now, we have rationed gas during Carter's time, but not the way they had in World War II. And of course, youth groups went out looking for tires and all sorts of things to help the war effort, and we haven't seen that since.
Oh no.
Well,
no.
Dee, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I really hope that people will get on and get your book. Now, where is your book available?
It's available through Cedar Fort, so obviously online. Just to the store there in Cedar Fort in Springville, and also it's available online. It's available online through Amazon and the larger Barnes and Nobles. Those publications also carry the book also.
Okay. Well, I really hope the people will take the time to order that book and read it. And like I said, it's an easy read. If you leave out the end notes and the bibliography, it's about 100 pages.
Yeah, right.
And so it's a very easy read. So, well, thank you very much, Dee, and I hope you have a great day.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Nice talking with you.